and that if you still believe in white supremacy or any hints of white supremacy and are not at the absolute top of the social structure, you ought to go looking for somebody to be mad at, right? Because the benefits of being a white person are like shrinking and shrinking and shrinking to be an ordinary white person, a regular white person, not a wealthy, rich white person. And so the payoff for white supremacy, the clientele for that payoff is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And in a sense, the majority of the white American population is dropping down to where black people are, which is to say your unemployment rate, your living conditions, your level of debt, your level of social anxiety is coming down to where we are. And I would like to say welcome to the club.
Family. Many a times when we mention the word slavery, discrimination, racism, the first thing that comes to your mind is that all these phenomena are for the disadvantage of a black man, or rather a person of color. But family, on today's video, we have a whole different perspective by a scholar who's an activist known as John H. Bracey. John H. Bracey discusses the disadvantages of racism to the white folks too. When we talk about white supremacists, we know that they benefit while the black folk, or rather the person of color, is disadvantaged. When it comes to matters, racial segregation in the US. This brother speaks in a topic that he called the cost of racism in white America, where he highlights the disadvantages of racism to both the black and white people. He mentions that the white people are not actually privileged, as they are pushing for racial discrimination in the US. They are also disadvantaged. So guys, I want us to watch this video of this scholar speaking to people about the cost of racism in white America. Once the video stops, we'll stop it, then do a critical analysis of the same, guys. Let's watch this video.
What I want to talk about, they asked me to talk long about Black History Month. And in most cases when you talk about the achievements of African Americans and what things that people don't know about what African Americans have done. But what I find is more effective in the recent years is to try to explain to white Americans what racism has cost them. Most people really aren't that concerned about, at a fundamental level, about the disadvantages that are placed upon African Americans. A lot of people rationalize those disadvantages or don't want to deal with them. So I've always found it more effective to say that racism is not free for anybody, and that you pay the price, for what has happened to African American people, that you're not getting off scot-free, and that if you still believe in white supremacy or any hints of white supremacy and are not at the absolute top of the social structure, you ought to go looking for somebody to be mad at, right? Because the benefits of being a white person are like shrinking and shrinking and shrinking to be an ordinary white person, a regular white person, not a wealthy, rich white person. And so the payoff for white supremacy, the clientele for that payoff is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And in a sense, the majority of the white American population is dropping down to where black people are, which is to say your unemployment rate, your living conditions, your level of debt, your level of social anxiety is coming down to where we are. And I would like to say welcome to the club, or misery loves company. But I would prefer to think that once you comprehend that, there'll be a possibility of more joint action to correct that situation. And that racism is not just something that affects us, as black people, it affects you. And the failure of this nation to deal with that in the past has consequences for you. And I'll briefly give you a sweeping overview of how this came about, and then I'll narrow down on how, in fact, this impacts on you today. Virtually every discussion of American history, every part of the national narrative that you've been taught immediately gets qualified or disqualified once you bring in the reality of the African American experience. That's why there was always such a widespread resistance to the teaching of the African American experience. Every national mythology, every slogan, right? Every, song you sing, land of the free, home of the brave, when you say, what about black people, you have to start qualifying. In some cases, you have to throw it totally out. This is a democracy. What about slavery? We all created equal. What about Jim Crow? We can rise as far as you can based on your individual merits. What about discrimination, disenfranchisement, quotas? Every single thing, every single part of the national mythology has to be called into question when you bring in the African American experience. And this is not something new. This is at the beginning, the foundations of the country. The mythology of Puritans landing at Plymouth Rock, colonists seeking religious freedom in Virginia. They're trekking slaves with them all the way. The first commonwealth to make slavery legal was Massachusetts, not Georgia, not Virginia, not South Carolina, Massachusetts. Right? There were slaves in every one of the 13 original colonies. So a narrative of a search for freedom and liberty is immediately qualified, but what about these slaves you have around you? The state that had the largest number of slaves outside of the South, outside of Georgia, second most largest, New York. This is not a down there phenomenon. You can say, well, I'm from north, slavery was down there somewhere. No, slavery was here. And a mythology, that tries to make racism something somewhere else robs you of your understanding of your relationship to that history. Disarms you in your ability to function in the world, with the antagonisms that you see before you. And it's just part of the cost. Right? The political cost after the American Revolution. The majority of slaves in the American Revolution fought for the British. Why? Because a monarchy promised to give abolition to those that fought. The patriots, fighters for liberty, did not. Right? So if I'm a slave and have a choice of who I'm going to run away and fight for, I'm fighting with Lord Dunsmore in South Carolina. I'm fighting with the British, right? Not with George Washington, a slaveholder, or Thomas Jefferson, a slaveholder, or Patrick Henry, a slaveholder. Give me liberty or give me death. What about me? Great slogan. Right? The failure to extend that ideology, right, throughout this society calls that ideology into question. Its beginning cost to racism is hypocrisy. You have a democratic Republican constitution. Well, first of all, democracy can't be democracy if half of the population, females, are put in a box and sent over there somewhere. Like, we're not even talking about them yet. Let's not even talk democracy, talking about human beings. Democracy means like men, and white men with property, So just the notion of democracy, it's like a narrow, finite notion at the beginning. And this is built into the Constitution, right? When the country is set up, And to handle this problem, we set up one of the great quota systems of all time, which is to say the House and the Senate. People talk about they don't believe in quotas and affirmative action is quotas. The U.S. Senate is a quota system. Every state gets 2 senators, regardless of population. Is that fair? Rhode Island and Texas are equal. North Dakota, California are equal. 400,000 white people in North Dakota have the same number of senators as 20 million people that live in California. It's a quota system. People don't object to that one. I haven't heard a word about that one. Right? So a fundamental inequality was built into the Constitution at the beginning. Why? To handle the problem of what? Slaves. Right? We were here as property. We were brought here as property. Right? But when it came time to count people in terms of representation in the House, we became people all of a sudden. The same people that owned us and kept us on a list with horses and cows, barrels of molasses, discovered when it came time to get political representation, we were people and should be counted for purposes of representation. Right? Well, since the founding fathers were wise men, we got the discount, 3/5. We weren't whole people, we were 60%, 40% off. Right? So in fact, built into the Constitution is everybody's people except black people who get 40% off. Right? How do you walk around the world and talk about democracy when the Constitution says that? The Constitution says that. It's not an add-on. It's the original. Right? What does this ensure? Right? Non-democratic representation in the national government of slaveholders. First presidents, Supreme Court justices, right? A national policy, right, that pursues slavery as a policy while talking freedom. Right? All of the major wars in this country down to the Civil War are fought to extend slavery. The most expensive war before the Civil War was the war with the Seminoles, Florida, Alabama, swamps. Why? Slaves were running away, hiding among the native population. Creeks, Choctaws, Chickasaws, Cherokees, Seminoles. The native populations were fighting to maintain their freedom and their independence to keep those slaves with them as free people. This country spent $40 million fighting to exterminate Native Americans in the eastern part of the United States. When they couldn't exterminate, they shipped the Cherokee, the 5 civilized tribes they call them, on the Trail of Tears in 1842 out to the west, Oklahoma, reservations. They confined the Seminoles, who are still at war technically with the United States, into the Everglades in Florida. It's the most expensive war this country fought before the Civil War. Not about freedom, but to extend slavery. Right? It's the next war for the Civil War, Mexican War. Remember the Alamo? Let's not remember the Alamo. They have yet to make a movie about the Alamo. They made another one trying to clean it up a little bit. Where's the movie that says that Jim Bridges a slaveholder? David Crockett's a slaveholder. Sam Houston is a slaveholder. Stephen A. Austin is a slaveholder. They are fighting to expand slavery into Mexico because Mexico had abolished slavery. Santa Anna may have been a dictator, but there was no slavery in Mexico, and slaves were running away from the South into Mexico to be free. Freedom-loving Texans carrying their slaves into Mexico said, you cannot bring these people here. We don't have slavery. What's the response to declare Texas independent? Not for freedom, but to expand slavery. Make that movie. Put Denzel in that one. As a slave who had run away and is fighting in the Mexican army at the Alamo. That's the movie. Black people in the Mexican army at the Alamo fighting slaveholders. Make that movie. See, the cost of racism is you don't know what happened in this country. You glorify slaveholders as heroes because you don't know they're slaveholders. You're not taught that. You walk around in complete ignorance of that. Right? You have political leadership in the 19th century that ignored slavery. Right? The people that said abolish slavery, we are taught are fanatics. William Lloyd Garrison, all fanatical abolitionists, all fanatic. John Brown, oh, he's crazy. John Brown, oh, he's crazy. Oh, no, crazy. No. What did Garrison believe? Slavery was wrong, should be abolished. Why does that make you crazy? Why is that a sign of lunacy? Why is Thomas Jefferson not crazy for owning slaves? And William Lloyd Garrison's crazy for wanting to abolish slavery. That's what you teach in your books. Look at the paragraph on William Lloyd Garrison in any textbook you got. See what they say about it. And John Brown. What did John Brown want to do? John Brown believed in direct action. He was a good American. Got a problem, solve it. How do you solve the problem of slavery? John Brown said, well, it's very simple. You kill all the slaveholders. That's the American way, right? That's why we have the largest military in the world. When we have a problem, kill it. Right? You don't like something, kill it. Right? That's why we got this massive military. Right? You got to drop bombs on it. John Brown was an American. He said, we have a problem. Slavery, kill it. They said, oh, no, no, no. He's crazy. Why is he crazy? Well, he started to do it. Went to Kansas and Nebraska, to stop the expansion of slavery by killing slaveholders. Guess who caught him? Robert E. Lee at Harper's Ferry in the Union Army. And they told John Brown they were going to hang him. John said, I understand. I lost. I didn't win. You know what his last words were? He said, do you regret what you did? He said, the problem was we didn't kill enough people. He said, I made a mistake because I thought we could solve this problem by killing a few slaveholders. He said, we're going to have to purge this land with blood before we end slavery. Now you would think that somebody listening to that would say, slavery is a problem, let us end it and solve this problem. Nobody did. What happens 2 years after John Brown is dead? Fort Sumter, the Civil War. There are more casualties, dead and wounded, in the Civil War than in all the American wars combined. All of them. World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Spanish-American War, and the numbers in Iraq. More in the U.S. Civil War to abolish slavery than in all the wars this country's fought combined. No. But if you had said to white Americans, give me 1 million lives to free the slaves, they said, no, I'm not doing that. But to ignore slavery cost 1 million lives. Right? To not have compensated emancipation, you had in the West Indies. Right? To ignore racism, right, cost almost 1 million white people their lives. Not black people. They wouldn't even let us in the army. There were only 200,000 black people that had to fight their way into the army to fight. Right? They had to demand the right to fight. Then they wouldn't even pay them equal wages. So he said, don't pay us anything. The 54th and 55th turned back to pay. They said, we can't pay you what we pay white people because you're not good enough. And besides, you're black. They said, don't pay us anything. We'll fight for free. Right? For free. It cost 1 million white people their lives. And over 1 million white people their limbs and their arms. Over slavery. But if you had put that on the table, nobody would have bought it. But the failure to deal with slavery, that's the price white people paid. For looking the other way. For ignoring it, saying, well, it's not my problem. We'll deal with it next year sometime. Right? So you think maybe people would learn, right, after slavery is over. All black people say, well, let's forget about the past, don't dwell on slavery. Can we have the minimum to live as Americans? We worked for over 250 years with no compensation. Can we have just 40 acres, small farm, and 1 mule to work it? No. No. Can't have it. Son American. You're free now, you're on your own. Well, what about back pay? No. No, you're not entitled to anything. You're free, you're on your own. Right? And so black Americans tried to put their lives together as ex-slaves and made the most remarkable transitions in American democracy this country's seen. The first public schools in the South were put into place by Reconstruction governments dominated by ex-slaves. Free public education for everybody. You had no public schools in the South because to educate white Southerners would be the slaves might hear something and learn something, therefore nobody gets educated. Right? The price of keeping black people dumb is to keep white people just as dumb. And they're proud of it. At least they're not black. Right? That's why even today, when you think higher education, great schools, you don't think Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. Right. Some of those places didn't get mandatory school attendance until the 1970s. 1970s, you didn't have to go to school. It wasn't a law that said you had to go to school in Mississippi till the 1970s.
Family, John Bracey's work on the cost of racism to white America explores the economic and social disadvantages that racism imposes on white people, as well as on the society as a whole. You know, many a times people think that the effects of racism are actually of disadvantage for the black folk only. He says that the cost of racism in white America explores economic and social disadvantages that racism imposes on white people as well as the society as a whole. I want that to be so clear, guys. It challenges the common belief that only minorities suffer the consequences of racism by outlining the hidden costs of white American. Bracey and his co-authors argue that racism harms white Americans in several ways. And guys, I want us to look at those ways that racism is actually interfering with white Americans too. It's not about the people of color only. We are not the only people who are actually going through the negative impacts of racism. The people who think are better, the people who think like they are superior, the white supremacists in this case, they do not know how they are being affected adversely by racism that they are advocating for. The first way that the white supremacists are affected, rather the white racists, is number one, the economic costs. Racism reinforces systemic inequality, which hinders economic growth. Discrimination limits opportunities for large portions of the population, reducing productivity and overall wealth for the society. I repeat, racism reinforces systemic inequality, which hinders economic growth. So you notice when there is systemic inequality, there is hindrance in economic growth. Discrimination limits opportunities for large portions of people. You know, when there are opportunities for everyone, that would mean that the economy can easily grow because each and every person is adding value to the economy. But when there is discrimination, it becomes so hard, you know, for the people who feel like they are superior, for them to be able to grow the economy. He proceeds to say, reducing productivity and overall wealth for the society. So if not many people get opportunities, we are reducing productivity and overall wealth of the whole society. You know, it's not about color here. It's about the productivity of the general population in a country. By excluding people of color from full participation in the economy, there is a loss of potential talent, creativity, and innovation. Look at the creative minds of black people in the US. Look at their movies. Look at people like Kevin Hart, you know, Will Smith, all those big names. You know, I just want to assume that they were not in the field of the creative arts that they are pushing. Look at people like Jay-Z, Beyonce, Rihanna. These are people of color, you know, in the US. Let me say they did not get opportunity. What would that bring to the creative economy of the US? So when not the whole population is engaged, there'll be economic constraints in a country. So when white supremacists are busy pushing, for racism, when they're busy pushing for discrimination, that would mean that they will be affected because the economy of their country won't grow as much as when they try and give people equal opportunities irrespective of the color of their skin, where they come from, and their accent, man. So when people come together as a whole, when people come together as one, it is easier for the economy to grow bigger and bigger. And that's how Bracey came up with a topic, of the cost of racism in white America. At times you laugh and think that, black people are, we have made them, we've convinced them to feel inferior. We are the ones who are in control. We are the ones who are getting top seats in the government. We are ruling. You tend to forget it's actually deeper than you all think. You could have those positions, but at the end of the day, you won't get the growth that you all could have gotten when you are together with black folks. And that's the point of economic costs, the cost of racism in white America. Then the second one is the social costs. Segregation and discrimination foster division and conflict within communities. This leads to a breakdown in social cohesion and increases spending on social control measures such as policing and prisons. There are times when the social systems in a country are poor, you end up spending a lot of money in prisons and policing. You see the rage the police force has in the US, the monies they waste, having to follow black folks all around, pulling them over, taking our lives. It's crazy. It's so crazy that socially, black folks and white folks, it has been difficult for them to relate well in the US. So segregation and discrimination foster division and conflict within communities. When there is conflict, there is no conducive environment for any businesses. There is no conducive environment for right upbringing of children. There's no conducive environment for education. So when white supremacists continue pushing for racism, if they continue pushing for discrimination and segregation of black people and people of color in the US, that would mean that there will be no peace. Each and every time people will be fighting, there will be disagreements. That would mean that that country will be difficult, to move forward. So it's actually easier for white supremacists to stop the issue of racism and for people to tag along and live peacefully as human beings. Then there's the third way, which is the political costs. The perpetuation of racism and racial fear often manipulates white working class Americans into voting against their own economic interest. Policies that cut social programs hurt low-income white people just as much, if not more, than the minorities. They also pass through a lot. We have the wealthy white people, then now we have the middle class white men and women who are actually of the same class like most black people. They are not benefiting in any way. They start voting against themselves. They start voting against their white leaders. They now want black leaders because they are not being helped in any way. And that is a negative effect, of them pushing for racist ideologies in the country. People get tired. The perpetuation of racism and racial fear often manipulates white working class Americans into voting against their own economic interests. Then we have point number 4, where we'll talk about moral and psychological costs. Racism dehumanizes not only those who are oppressed, but also those who benefit from or perpetuate it. It fosters a false sense of superiority, which limits empathy and connection across racial lines, leading to a more fragmented and less compassionate society. The main thrust of Bracey's analysis is that racism doesn't just affect the direct victims, but harms the society in its entirety. You know, everyone is affected. It's not about black folk. It's not about white folk. Everyone is affected in the eternity. And I repeat, the main thrust of Bracey's analysis is that racism does not just affect the direct victims, but harms the society in its entirety, including white Americans who may not be aware of the broader consequences. You know, when you look at it from a point of, you know, black people cannot make it, black people are thieves, you know, like people put it outside there, black people cannot get top jobs, you know, that's what white supremacists have in their mind. But what they do not know is that the more they push for a racially biased society, the more they are also affected. And that's why this topic of the cost of racism in white America was introduced by this scholar activist. And I really, really like the topic, and I thought that I should share it just to enlighten white folks and make them know that they're actually also being affected by this. They're not any special in the US. I actually try and push for an equal, you know, an equal society. A society that everyone respects their fellow human beings. There is nobody who's greater than the other. You know, the issue of white supremacist ideologies should end in the US, and that's why I do such videos. So guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Kindly do consider subscribing to my channel for amazing black stories in Africa and in the diaspora, guys. I have done a series of black history in the US, and guys, I've done more than 30 videos so far. Go check them out. So that we may be able to learn together. Comment down below, let me know what you think about this video, and I'll be so grateful. Kindly like this video so that it can also be recommended to other YouTube users, and I'll be so grateful, guys. Subscribe. We are on the road to 20,000 subscribers. Hopefully we'll be hitting 14, 15, 16, all the way to 20 soon. Guys, I have a target of hitting that within the month. Kindly help me hit the target, and I'll be so grateful, even as we continue to push the agenda of enlightening black folks all over the world. Guys, thank you. See you all in my next video. Goodbye.